The Galactic Empire of Karth believed in rituals the way humans believed in gravity. Wars were not fought on a whim. They were announced, catalogued, and archived before the first shot was ever fired. Every conquest followed precedent. Every invasion was measured, justified, and recorded in elegant glyphs carved into memory crystals older than most stars. That was why the Empire was undefeated. And that was why Earth never stood a chance, on paper. When the Karth Armada translated into the Sol system, it did so in perfect ceremonial formation. Thousands of warships unfolded from hyperspace like a steel scripture written across the void, each hull polished to reflect starlight, each bearing sigils of worlds reduced to obedience. They did not rush. Rushing was for animals. A single vessel advanced, its broadcast array unfurling like a crown. The message went out on every frequency: radio, neutrino, quantum entangled relay, translated instantly into every known sapient tongue. By decree of the High Throne of Karth, the voice announced, calm and impossibly old. This system has been evaluated and claimed. The dominant species of the third planet, designated Terra, is hereby annexed into the Empire. Your resistance is statistically irrelevant. Your surrender is advised. Compliance will be rewarded. Non-compliance will be corrected. The transmission ended with a ceremonial chime. Across Earth, life paused. In Washington, the message cut through a shouting match between politicians arguing about budgets and borders. In Moscow, it interrupted a late-night briefing no one wanted to attend. In Islamabad, Beijing, London, and cities that had burned and rebuilt a dozen times before, men and women stared at screens in stunned silence. For 12 seconds, no one spoke. Then an old general, gray-haired, spine stiff with decades of wars that never quite ended, leaned back in his chair and exhaled slowly. Well, he said. They finally showed up. The Karth expected chaos. They expected mass panic, religious hysteria, fragmented resistance, and desperate appeals to powers that didn't exist. That was how first contact usually went when a species realized it was not alone, and that it was not on top of the food chain. Instead, Earth went quiet. Not the screaming kind of quiet. The working kind. Satellites adjusted their orbits without fanfare. Deep-sea cables pulsed with encrypted traffic written in languages that technically no longer existed. Submarines that hadn't surfaced in years received authentication codes sealed since the 20th century. Bunkers buried beneath mountains unlocked doors that had never officially been built. Men who had spent their entire careers preparing for wars that politicians swore would never happen finally stopped pretending. On one such mountain, a human admiral watched the alien fleet through augmented glass. He didn't look impressed. He looked annoyed. They parked too close, he muttered. Above Earth, the Karth observed. Why are they not responding? Asked a junior strategist, frills twitching with unease. They are processing inevitability, replied a senior warlord, ancient scars etched into his armored crest. Fear paralyzes lesser species. The strategist hesitated. Their planetary emissions are increasing. Civil unrest? The warlord said dismissively. They will break themselves before we have to. The High Throne granted Earth 6 standard hours to surrender. Humanity used 5. At precisely 5 hours, 11 minutes, and 42 seconds after the ultimatum, the sun flared. Not violently. Not randomly. Precisely. Karth's sensors screamed as Sol's electromagnetic output spiked and controlled, rhythmic pulses. Shield harmonics destabilized. Targeting solutions degraded. Navigation systems drifted just enough to be wrong when it mattered. What is happening? Demanded the high strategist. They are manipulating their star, whispered an analyst, horror bleeding through professional discipline. That's impossible, the strategist snapped. Their technology level is irrelevant, the analyst finished. They planned for this. Earth finally responded. The transmission was simple. No ceremony. No translation aid. Just a human voice, unfiltered and tired, speaking in a language that carried centuries of war in its cadence. This is Earth, the woman said. You've made a mistake. The Karth laughed. They had heard defiance before. The order to fire was given without hesitation. Orbital lances carved down through atmosphere and cloud, striking cities already evacuated. Coastlines boiled. Monuments that had survived empires turned to glass in seconds. The Karth recorded everything for posterity. Then the ground fired back. Missiles erupted from oceans, deserts, tundra, and forests the Karth hadn't bothered to map in detail. Hypersonic. Ungraceful. Relentless. They didn't glow with exotic energy or elegant containment fields. They were blunt instruments wrapped in human spite. The first battleship died in nuclear fire that cracked its ceremonial hull like cheap porcelain. Another vanished under kinetic rods dropped from platforms marked decommissioned in galactic archives. "What are these weapons?" shouted a fleet commander as alarms wailed. "They are crude," someone cried. "They are effective," another corrected, just before their ship tore itself apart trying to compensate for gravity that shouldn't have been there. Humanity wasn't matching Karth technology. They were abusing the universe itself. By the end of the 6th hour, 37 Karth warships were gone. Earth still stood. And every surviving Karth officer realized the same terrible truth at once. The humans weren't improvising. They were executing plans written by a species that had always assumed the sky might someday fall. The High Throne watched the tactical display flicker red and whispered something no Karth Emperor had ever said before. "Signal a reassessment." On Earth, the Admiral allowed himself a thin smile. "That," he said, "was just us answering the door." The Karth Empire had conquered 100 systems with fear as their weapon. Humans? Humans were amused by fear. Or rather, they treated it like a puzzle: observe, calculate, and turn it into a trap. The first Karth dropships hit what had once been Eastern Europe. They expected scattered resistance. Civilians begging for mercy. Tactical surrender. What they got instead was emptiness. Streets empty, doors ajar, silence punctuated by distant, controlled explosions. The aliens panicked. Their scanners detected life, but life was nowhere. The first squad walked into a building that was rigged to collapse at the sound of a footstep. The ceilings fell. The walls folded inward. The humans didn't even watch. They were already elsewhere, laughing under breath radios nobody could intercept. The Karth lost hundreds in the first hour. The surviving troops scrambled, firing energy rifles with ceremonial precision, but bullets hit air, or concrete that wasn't supposed to move. Mines the humans had planted decades ago, obsolete, according to every galactic database, detonated with brutal timing. A Karth captain cornered a human, assuming the human would surrender like all species eventually did. The man was old, gray, walking with a cane. He raised the rifle, aimed at a joint in the walker, a 3-story killing machine, and whispered, "For my grandson," before squeezing the trigger. The explosion wasn't elegant. It wasn't poetic. It was effective. In orbit, the High Throne finally realized the magnitude of their mistake. "This species is not primitive," it hissed, every syllable laced with disbelief. "They are restrained." Humans escalated. Old satellites, left to drift decades ago, were guided into collision courses with warships. Relativistic impacts shredded alloys that the Karth had assumed indestructible. Electronics fried. Shields flickered and failed. Fleet formations scattered like scared animals. Hackers, human ones, took over alien command systems. They didn't just disable them. They replaced tactical displays with grainy footage of human history, soldiers charging into machine guns, cities burning, and men standing in rubble screaming, unbroken. Every kill, every survival tactic, every bloody triumph was broadcast live into Karth cockpits. You wanted compliance. You got history. The display flashed in English, untranslatable, undeniable. The Karth tried diplomacy. A new transmission begged for surrender. "We are willing to negotiate terms of vassalage," their advisors whispered, trembling. Earth answered not with words, but with contempt. A human senator, his voice thick with years of smoke, blood, and bureaucracy, leaned into a camera and said, "You don't get to negotiate after bombing our cities." The Karth Emperor's next order was planet killers, devices meant to fracture the crust of Earth, vaporize continents, erase history. They never fired. Because a single, unmarked human ship, black as death and thrumming with menace, slammed into the lead planet killer at full acceleration. Both vanished in a burst of light that could be seen from Mars. Sacrifice, weaponized. Strategy, lethal. Humanity had reminded the Karth of the one lesson they never fully learned: humans didn't surrender, not truly, not ever. Every surviving Karth officer stared at their fleet. 40 ships were gone. Communication arrays burned. Troops were trapped on continents rigged to explode at the humans' discretion. Systems that the Empire had relied upon for millennia failed simultaneously. A Karth priest stammered, voice trembling. What are they?" "They are survivors," whispered the Emperor. "They are monsters," muttered the strategist. "They are humans," said the priest. And in that moment, the Karth understood the depth of their miscalculation. They hadn't invaded a planet. They'd poked a sleeping apex predator, and it had just opened its eyes. War, the Karth discovered too late, was humanity's oldest profession. Earth's fleets vanished from Sol almost overnight, leaving wreckage, silence, and ghosts in orbit. The Karth cheered. They thought the humans had retreated. They thought the war was won. They thought they had finally cornered their prey. They were wrong. The first trap struck in the Kuiper Belt. A human reconnaissance group, tiny and unassuming, lured an entire wing of Karth cruisers through a field of unstable asteroids. Gravity mines, long forgotten from experiments Earth never publicized, triggered automatically. A single cruiser spun out of control, tearing another 3 ships with it before it even registered an attack. The Karth Emperor's rage was now personal. "Bring them to me," he demanded. "I want their surrender. I want proof they are flesh, not shadow." Humans didn't surrender. Humans didn't show themselves until it suited them. Fleets reappeared in Karth space, patchwork vessels with battered hulls and reinforced interiors, crewed by soldiers whose average age was older than most Karth ships. Every ship was a museum of improvisation, spare parts, scavenged engines, and weapons that should have been junked decades ago. And yet, every attack was precise. Every maneuver lethal. Boarding actions became their signature. Humans entered Karth vessels not with terror, but with knives, shotguns, and ugly enthusiasm. Bulkheads were marked in blood and grease with messages no alien translator could fully grasp. "Welcome to the food chain." One Karth commander, cornered in his own bridge, demanded answers. "Why do you fight like this? You are statistically doomed." The human marine holding him shrugged, sweat and soot streaked across his face. "Statistics never met my species," he said. Then he pulled the trigger. Meanwhile, insurgencies flared on Karth-controlled worlds. Human advisors appeared where none should have been, training local populations in lethal efficiency, teaching them improvisation, patience, and the subtle art of terror. Entire sectors of the Empire, once obedient, erupted. Governors who had once reported in confidence now reported corpses, destruction, and chaos. The Emperor ordered planetary bombardments, but the humans anticipated each strike. Cities evacuated, populations hidden, countermeasures pre-laid. Bombs fell into empty shells. Nuclear fire detonated in empty deserts. The Emperor grew desperate. "Deploy the armadas!" he shouted. "Crush them before they expand!" Humanity didn't expand. Humanity struck. Karth's supply lines vanished. Convoys were ambushed with rudimentary weapons, made extraordinary by cunning. Ambassadors were captured alive, questioned, then released, just in time to spread stories that would fracture Karth loyalty. In orbit over the Karth homeworld, the Emperor's palace burned. The surviving guard, realizing defeat was inevitable, assassinated him in a last act of desperation. Too late. Human fleets, almost invisible in the shadows of stars, entered the heart of the Empire not as conquerors but as executioners. They struck with surgical precision, punishing arrogance, cruelty, and overconfidence. And then came the message. Broadcast across the galaxy, translated into every language, every dialect. We didn't want the stars. We just wanted you to leave us alone. A human envoy appeared on the ruined throne room of the Emperor, unarmed, calm, almost bored. You should have listened, they said. Every system that had ever trembled under Karth rule heard it. Every officer, every bureaucrat, every soldier felt the weight of what it meant to underestimate humanity. The Karth Empire, once an unshakable monolith, fractured in weeks. Humans did not seek conquest. They only reminded the galaxy that some species are better left alone. And in that moment, the message was clear: Earth was not just a planet. It was a warning. The war ended not with trumpets, but with exhaustion. Earth bore its scars quietly. Cities rebuilt. Graves filled. Oceans, rivers, and deserts carried the memory of fire, but humanity endured. They did not raise an empire. They did not demand tribute or subjugation. They did something far more terrifying. They returned to life, stronger and wiser, and left the galaxy to rethink every assumption about them. Galactic civilizations, even those who had once laughed at humanity, rewritten their histories overnight. First contact protocols were amended across hundreds of star systems, one clause repeated in every known language. Do not threaten the humans. On Earth, old soldiers sat on porches beneath alien skies, sipping cheap alcohol, telling stories that no one would believe. Families grew. Children learned to laugh, to survive, and to remember. The people who had faced annihilation didn't celebrate. They reflected. They knew the cost of being underestimated, and they never allowed it again. A Karth child born after the war approached a human historian aboard a station orbiting a neutral system. Why did your species fight like that? The child asked, wide-eyed, innocent. The historian, a veteran with scars no treaty could erase, paused. He looked at the ruins of the galaxy through reinforced glass, the bones of empires glittering in starlight. Because, he said slowly, you thought war was about winning. For us, it's about not losing. Humans sent one last message into the void. Not a threat. Not a boast. Just a quiet, measured warning. We are peaceful. We are patient. We are not weak. Across the galaxy, every species that heard it believed. They had learned that to misjudge humans was not merely foolish, it was suicidal. The Karth Empire had dared to invade Earth. And humanity had responded not with panic, not with diplomacy, but with genius, patience, and unrelenting ferocity. They had wiped the invaders out. Instantly. And the galaxy had learned, in ways that could never be forgotten, that humans were predators with a long memory, a sharp mind, and an even sharper sense of humor. HFY